They told you immigrants just come here to escape war and hardship, but they didn't tell you what happens when they walk into your job interview. In the past decade, the United States has experienced a dramatic increase in the number of refugees and asylum seekers, particularly from regions such as Central America, the Middle East, and parts of Africa. While much of the public discourse focuses on humanitarian responsibility and moral obligation, one reality often goes unspoken: the impact of this influx on the American labor market, especially for working-class citizens. When refugees arrive, they are quickly funneled into various assistance programs aimed at integration. But what's rarely highlighted is how these programs often include immediate pathways to employment. These aren't just part-time, low-level jobs either. In states like Texas, California, and Illinois, reports have shown an increasing number of entry-level and even semi-skilled positions being filled by individuals who arrived in the country less than 12 months ago. In sectors like food processing, construction, transportation, and service, employers are incentivized, often through tax credits and subsidies, to hire from this new labor pool. What's critical to understand is that these incentives come with real trade-offs. For every new worker hired through refugee placement programs, there is often one less position available to native-born Americans, particularly those without a college degree. Employers, especially in cost-sensitive industries, have strong financial motivation to fill roles with workers who are willing to accept lower wages, fewer benefits, and less job security. Refugees, many of whom are in urgent need of income and stability, fit that profile perfectly. In Iowa, for example, local meatpacking plants have seen waves of new hires from refugee communities, largely replacing local workers who previously held those positions. Plant managers claim the decision isn't about discrimination, but rather about reliability and labor costs. The refugees are willing to work longer hours for less, and the companies avoid union pushback. The end result? The same jobs once seen as dependable, albeit tough, sources of income for American families are now out of reach for many due to wage suppression and hiring preference shifts. Another overlooked factor is the sheer volume of incoming labor. According to federal data, over 1 million refugees and asylum seekers have entered the U.S. within the last 5 years. That's more than the entire population of some states. While not all of them enter the workforce immediately, a significant proportion, especially men aged 20 to 40, are actively seeking employment within the first 3 to 6 months of arrival. This sudden spike in labor supply inevitably increases competition for jobs that are already scarce in economically struggling regions. What further complicates the situation is the federal and NGO coordination that facilitates refugee job placement. Organizations like the International Rescue Committee and Catholic Charities receive funding to ensure quick integration into the workforce. Their staff often work directly with large corporations and mid-sized employers to prioritize refugee candidates for open roles. In some cases, these organizations even pre-train refugees in language and technical skills to better meet employer needs, giving them a competitive edge over local applicants who receive no such support. Critics argue that this system effectively sidelines Americans who are already struggling. In cities like Minneapolis and Buffalo, local residents have begun to voice concerns about losing out on jobs to recently arrived migrants. Town hall meetings have included testimonies from citizens who were passed over for janitorial, warehouse, and food service roles in favor of newly arrived individuals backed by resettlement programs. Still, many media outlets and political figures either avoid or downplay this topic, framing it as anti-immigrant sentiment rather than economic displacement. But data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics paints a clearer picture. In counties with high refugee intake, there's often a noticeable drop in wages for low-skilled jobs within 18 months. And this isn't coincidental. When you flood a local job market with workers who are eager to accept lower compensation, wage equilibrium is inevitably disrupted. One particularly revealing example came from a logistics hub outside of Atlanta. Over the span of 2 years, the workforce shifted from being 90% local-born to nearly half comprised of refugee labor. The wages during this period dropped by 20%, and benefits like overtime pay and health coverage became less common. The company faced no legal violations, just economic optimization within the boundaries of current labor laws, What's even more concerning is how this shift reverberates beyond the paycheck. Families who once relied on stable jobs in warehousing, maintenance, or food production are now forced to piece together gig work or rely on public assistance themselves. It becomes a cruel irony. While refugees are supported through federal and local programs to find stable employment, the Americans who lose those same jobs are left to fend for themselves. This isn't just happening in isolated towns or border states, it's a national pattern, and the longer it's left unexamined, the more severe the consequences could become. The economy doesn't expand overnight to accommodate a sudden labor increase, especially when that labor is being filtered directly into sectors already strained by automation and outsourcing. The truth is, the shift we're seeing isn't accidental, it's systemic. Behind every refugee resettlement is a network of public agencies, nonprofits, and corporations working in lockstep. While most Americans picture charity and compassion, what's often at play is a labor strategy. Federal programs like the Matching Grant and Refugee Cash Assistance offer financial support to resettlement agencies only if refugees find employment quickly. This turns job placement into a numbers game, where speed and volume outweigh consideration for local labor conditions. The U.S. Office of Refugee Resettlement even outlines specific employment goals, pushing agencies to get 70% of their clients into jobs within the first few months. That sounds efficient on paper, but in practice it means a constant funnel of foreign workers into industries already struggling with wage stagnation and job insecurity. In many cases, employers are directly connected with refugee agencies that hand them ready-to-work candidates. No need to advertise locally, interview broadly, or offer competitive wages. Now ask yourself, if you're an employer choosing between a refugee worker who comes pre-trained, subsidized, and supported by a nonprofit, or a local resident who needs fair pay and benefits, who do you think they'll pick? This system thrives in silence. Few journalists investigate it. Politicians on both sides of the aisle often avoid confronting it for fear of being labeled intolerant or politically incorrect. But for millions of working-class Americans, Black, white, Hispanic, the effects are real. Less opportunity, lower wages, more competition, and a sense that their government is prioritizing someone else. In Springfield, Missouri, one local union quietly reported that over one-third of its job applicants in food processing plants were being rejected because of what insiders called refugee staffing partnerships. These arrangements, typically made through staffing firms, grant employers access to a nearly endless supply of workers, while pushing out locals deemed less flexible. When challenged, companies argue they're simply following legal and economic logic, but the outcomes are hard to ignore. In cities like Des Moines and Louisville, refugee-heavy industries show consistent downward pressure on wages. A 2023 report by a nonpartisan labor research group found that hourly pay for some warehousing roles had dropped by nearly 30% since 2018, even while corporate profits surged. Meanwhile, advocacy organizations present this as a win-win. Refugees gain jobs and businesses get reliable labor, but they don't mention who loses in the process. Working Americans, especially those without college degrees or strong networks, are slowly edged out of the very industries that once sustained them. And while it's easy to blame corporations, the truth is, this is baked into immigration and labor policy. The government knows this happens. Economists have documented the pattern for decades. An influx of low-wage workers leads to short-term productivity boosts, but long-term suppression of wages and reduced bargaining power for native workers. The conversation around refugees has been deliberately framed as a moral one. But there is a critical economic dimension that can't be ignored, and it's not about blaming the individuals who arrive. It's about asking why the system is designed to favor their labor over yours. The U.S. resettlement machine is expanding. In 2024, the target ceiling for refugee admissions was raised to 125,000. That doesn't include asylum seekers, parolees, or undocumented migrants, all of whom also eventually compete in the job market. Quietly, some industries are lobbying for even more admissions, citing labor shortages as the reason. But are these real shortages, or just a desire for cheaper labor? The final twist? While American workers are told to retrain, relocate, or work harder, the system gives refugee labor an escalator, one built on programs most Americans don't even know exist. Meanwhile, millions remain underemployed, resentful, and unheard. Now ask yourself this: who is really benefiting from this system? And more importantly, who's paying the price? If this made you rethink something you've been told, leave a comment. Let's hear your story. And if you want to dig deeper into what's really happening behind the scenes, make sure to subscribe. More is coming.